I don't know if I'm going to ask this correctly, but a lot of people just simply don't know architecture at like any type of level. So the example is like a couple of friends of mine like walking through New City or New York City or whatever city, and they see a building. They're like, "Oh, that's cool, that's new," but they don't know like what it is. So I guess like my question is like, what is the current? We talked about this previously. What is the current trend of architecture? Like, what is architecture now? Because a lot of people think it's a bunch of wavy things. A bunch of people think it's just a couple of like white, dark blocks stacked together, but they don't know like what it's coming from. Like, what are the forms of it? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think the short answer is it's all of those things. Architecture is like just the built environment. Like anything that you like, close your eyes and picture a city, any major city, Chicago, New York. What is the first thing you picture? It's going to be the skyline, because that's what you imagine when you arrive at a new place or a place that you've already been, something that is near and dear to your heart. It's the environment around you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess the short answer is it's all of those things. If you're talking about like trends and movements, it's a harder question to answer because it depends on sort of where your allegiances lie. There are a lot of people who are like, hyper strict modernists. You see a lot of that here because LA is just a newer city. Is not as much history here to be built off of. There's a lot of things that sort of replicate different movements of the past. But it's just sort of a contrivance. Like it's something that's built off of something that actually existed at a time to make it look like it was built at that time. Now it wasn't, because the city just wasn't around when that was a thing. You look at places again, like where I used to live in New Orleans. There are buildings. I worked on buildings that were built in 1840s, right? So those buildings have been around. They have the look, the aesthetic they have, because at the time, those were the best ways they knew how to build. So to me, these kind of like contemporary buildings that are built to look like older buildings are always going to be a pastiche, like a copy of something that already existed. Now the wavy stuff, I think there's some merit to that, because like I said, those older buildings, especially like in New Orleans specifically, like the French and Spanish colonial influences, you can kind of trace history through the migration of peoples. So that those influences are coming from like the Afro-Caribbean slave trade and the settlers from Spain and France. So that has historical ties that influences the way that things were built, because where they came from, that's their only conception of what architecture looks like, because they haven't been other places. In fact, a lot of the people who came from there were settling these places thinking, this is the new version of where I came from. So I want it to look like what I'm used to, right? So not having those kind of influences in contemporary America, you have to look in other places to find that inspiration. And I think we had talked about this when we were talking when we first met.
Backstory: we met at like a bespoke event.
Yeah, it was a rooftop like cocktail party. It was fun. It was a good night.
Yeah, it was. The outdoors were actually really good, like little foods.
Yeah, the little tiny sliders.
Hors d'oeuvres.
Yeah, they were great. Anyway, the contemporary movements, not even, movements throughout history, just like art, it's usually a rejection of the previous movement, or in some way like a response to it. So you get things that are pared back, like we were talking about modernism. Richard Myers, a super famous modernist architect who lives here. His office is actually in LA. The rejection of that movement would be postmodernism. Modernism is characterized by like very sort of utilitarian, like the materials that you can tell what they're doing and they don't do anything else. It's like glass, concrete, steel, and it's just doing what it's doing. It's honesty in material. They want it to just perform as exactly what the building is doing to hold itself up, and that's it. No decoration, no ornate features that are added to it. It's just, this is what it is. The rejection of that is postmodernism, which they'll also have in like a lot of different art movements and sculpture and painting. I'm sure there's something equivalent in photography too. That is characterized by like the over amplification of ornament. They just want extra shit on everything, like colors and kind of fake columns that don't really support anything. weirdly shaped windows. That it's just sort of showing off, like, this is what we can do now. You know, like in the same way that buttresses in cathedrals that you used to see. It was like showing off, not because there is obviously a religious factor there, but also like, this is the capability of mankind right now. We can do this. This is really fucking cool. We want everybody to know about it. We're still doing the same thing, but now it's just translated into other forms, like you said about the wavy architecture. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it was really, really difficult to do that. We didn't have computer programs helping us to calculate those curves and how those things were supported. Now that we do, we want people to know about it. We want to show off the same way that they did in 17th century France. Like, hey, look at this kick-ass stuff that we can do because of the technology we have. So I think that's going to keep going, and you'll probably see it get more and more extreme. Now, there's always going to be, the old guard, the people who are more traditionalists that want to keep those old styles alive because they're super important historically. But then there's going to be the avant-garde folks who are just pushing further and further to show off what the technology can do nowadays. And because it's going to be such a far cry from what we can even imagine right now, it's hard for me to even try to conceive of what that would look like.
True.